Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Ben and I'm a watercolor artist based out of South Dakota. And in this lesson, I'm going to teach you the basics of making a watercolor landscape by teaching you how to paint water, trees, rocks, different colored skies, and mountains with this really awesome medium. And to start off this lesson, I'm going to show you the supplies you will need to do a watercolor painting of a landscape. So this is a pencil. You're going to need a pencil to get the basic outlines and bring your painting into context, and this is really important to get the whole piece started. And then once you're done with your sketch and you have a lot of your watercolor down, a base layer of watercolor, you're going to need an eraser because the eraser will erase the pencil marks. And generally with watercolors, you don't want very powerful pencil lines showing through because it'll make your painting look less realistic. You're going to need the star of the show, watercolor paint. I have a set of tubes that I use in this palette, but any sort of pans or anything will work. It doesn't have to be fancy. It could be Crayola watercolors. It could be fancy watercolors. It really doesn't matter. In addition to this, you're going to need a wide variety of brush sizes. And this is because you want to get a variety of brush stroke shapes and sizes. And that'll make your painting a lot more interesting. You're going to need paper towel because watercolor isn't a very easy medium to start out with. It's very hard to control the amount of water you're using, and it's always helpful to have a backup source if you make a mistake and add too much water. So this is a must. And then you need a cup of water. Yes, I know I'm using a laundry detergent cup, but any sort of cup that holds water will be fine. And this is the basic materials that you will need to do a good watercolor painting. So let's get into the lesson. Forgot to mention this, but in the aforementioned clip, I showed you all the materials you need. So when it comes to watercolor painting, you cannot use basic printer paper. It is way too thin, water will bleed right through it, and it just won't hold together. So for a watercolor painting, you need something that's made specifically for it called watercolor paper. Watercolor paper is a lot thicker, and this will allow, it's more textured, so it will allow the colors to really soak in, and your paper won't bend and buckle nearly as much as normal printer paper because it's so much thicker, and it's usually made with cotton, which allows it to absorb your colors better. So now we can get into the lesson. Now, watercolor is a transparent medium, so that means the more water you add, the lighter the colors are going to be. So if you want a really saturated color, you have to take your brush, put just a tad bit of water on it, and really mix it in with the color. But if you want a really light wash, you have to get lighter and lighter with the color, and you have to really water it down in order for it to get that thin, like this. So basically, if you want a really light washy color, like say in a lake or something, you want to really water it down. But if you want really saturated bits, like if you want a really dark green on a tree, you want to use a lot less water, and this will get you a lot darker value. So more water, lighter, less water, darker. This is an example of very many ways you can paint trees. Like, depending on what you're trying to capture in your landscape, you can have very warm yellow-based trees or very cool blue-based trees. I love using round brushes for most of my trees, but you can use a flat brush for a more spiky look, which makes a pine tree look really awesome. And when it comes to details, you can do basic washes to slight, simple detail to really complex. It's really infinite the amount of different techniques you can use on watercolors. So these are a couple ideas for trees. I'm sure there's many more that you could think of, but this is a great place to start. See, there's variety. 1 leaf, 2 leaf, Red leaf? Sorry, couldn't find a blue leaf. And when it comes to painting a sky with watercolors, the big thing with skies is adding lots and lots of water. Water will make the whole difference in it. Here, I added a lot of water and added some reds, some yellows, and blues to give it kind of a sunset vibe to it. And this one I used a paper towel to dab out to give it the illusion of clouds. Here's an example of a not very good landscape painting. You can see the edges are way too hard and defined, and it doesn't look realistic. Here, they're a lot more loose and vibrant, like a real sky. So that's how you paint skies. Here's an example. If you want to learn how to paint clouds good, see all this variation in the color. See, look at that. Look at all this variation and how the sun rays peek out from there. So do not make your clouds blocky like many beginners do, please, for my sake. I really need you to. Now when it comes to painting water, there's a couple different techniques you can use for it. In this example of a painting of Sioux Falls, you can see on the waterfall, there's a lot of loose watercolor lines, and this makes the illusion of the rocks behind. So when you're doing moving water, make sure to include a lot of white to look like the water is crashing and cascading. And in this example of still water, this is a really nice example of just wide brush strokes across, and it has a very subtle illusion of some movement, and that is one great way to make water. Here's another example of a lake in South Dakota. Here, it's a little choppier in the photo, so I added some little cross lines in a slightly different color to give it the illusion of waves, and just the slightest bit of back and forth with my slightly darker color. And if you have a big subject casting a shadow onto water, include that shadow, embrace that different value of color, because that will make the composition a lot more interesting. But if your water is completely still and not very moving, so to speak, just use a lot of water and do a lot of blending. In this reflection, you can see there is no hard lines. It's all blended together with water. And same thing here, it has a nice smooth gradient from my dark blue indigo value to a light sky blue up here. So this is a great example of very calm waters. Now there are several different techniques you can use to create mountains in a painting. You can create more distant or foggy mountains by adding more water towards the bottom and fading them out to look like valleys in between. Or if you want more detailed up close, you can add a lot more shading and more defined lines to make it look like very up close. You can use more cool green, blue, purple tones if you want it to look like a kind of shady tone to it. Or you can add more warmer oranges, yellows, reds, and browns to look like the sunlight is hitting at direct dawn. That happens a lot in more sunset paintings. You can make your peaks look a lot softer, more domed, or you can make them look sharper and more defined. And one of my favorite techniques for painting mountains is to draw lines down the middle of the peaks, and then either do a lot of lines on the left or right side and then shade that side more with watercolors. As you can see here, I left the right side on all these edges more white, and that gives the illusion of sunlight hitting it from one side. You can shade in both sides to make it look like it's more of a foggy day, or you can do it from the left. It really is up to you. So that this is there's a ton of fun ways out there to make mountains in watercolor. You see, I would love to give you an example of what a good mountain looks like, but it's unacceptable. I live where houses and flat land goes for hundreds of miles. So, sorry, but you're not getting any mountains. Now I want to show you what makes a mountain in a landscape look good and what makes it look bad. So here's a very early on painting of the Grand Tetons, and there's just lots of issues with everything in this. The colors, the values are way too blocky and not well defined. Like here, it looks like a lot of meshy brush strokes. This does not look realistic. Here the values are blending together and there just isn't enough in between. It's white, light gray, and black. You need a lot more gradation in a painting like this. And the trees in the front, you can see they all are bleeding together and they're very blocky. And this is a very bad example of what to do in a landscape. Now this is a more recent painting of the Grand Tetons. And here you can see there aren't any trees, but the grasses are subtle. They have slight gradations. And in the mountains, there's a lot more detail and contrast between the hills in the front and the white subjects of snow on the mountains. And even in the sky, you can see all this gradation in the clouds, and this really brings the whole piece together. So this is what to do in a mountain piece. And to conclude, I just want to remind you to keep going. There's so many amazing things you can create with watercolors. I mean, you can create portraits, plants, you can create a wide variety of animal paintings. You can create landscapes that represent places from around the world. And there's so many amazing things that you can do with this medium. So keep believing in yourself, because I believe in you.